So I was asked a question over email about placement of microphones for brass band recording. Now, the person that asked the question doesn't want me to mention their name, so I've just basically got their email here. The reason I was asked the question is because I'm a composer and audio producer, and I also I'm an live sound engineer and used to do recordings as well for bands and artists. So I've got quite a sort of varied experience. And I also then have my own recording services. So I'm happy to record all kinds of things. It all kind of falls into the same sort of business area, really. Composer and audio producer. So that's why I was asked. It came through an article I'd written somewhere, or a blog or something. So this is the question. And before I play this question to you, I just want to point out that this is based on my experience and my opinions. So other people might have different opinions. They might not agree with me. You might not like some of the stuff I'm going to say, but it is just an opinion. So don't want to cause any offence. It's just an observation. So here's the question.
I was wondering what your experiences were with microphone placement with a brass band. When I see the Black Dykes Bandroom in Queensbury, I know there is a hanging microphone right above the band, while Manger Musikklag is using a Zoom H6 and places it on a microphone stand. Do you have any knowledge and suggestions for microphone placement? i.e., when using your portable Zoom H6, do you need to place it in front of the band? And if so, do you want it above your head on a stand, or can you place it on a table? And if you can combine the Zoom internal mics with external ones, would you place it above the band, like Dyke, above the tenor horn section, or rather more in front of the band on the ceiling? Hope you have some time to take a look at this. Might be a good idea for a new video. Cheers, and have a nice weekend.
So yes, it is a good idea for a new video. It's quite an interesting subject for me. So let's have a look at what you're saying. So basically, the Black Dykes Bandroom, here it is. So first of all, the microphone placement isn't where you think it is. I found this tour and I can locate the microphones, and they're not above the tenor horns, they're here. Now I don't know what these are. They look like some kind of pencil condenser, some kind of condenser mic hanging down. So we'll have, this is above the conductor, I'd say, by looking at the room, and you would have a left and a right there. So basically you're hearing what the conductor's hearing roughly in his position. However, what I'd like to say about this is, I'm going to play you a clip now before I explain this. So that recording technically is a good recording, but for me that sounds too much like a room and the room that they're in. Now presumably that's the same room as this. I think it is, looking at the video. I've watched the whole video, it's quite interesting, you should have a look at it. But what's happening here is, I would say these aren't good enough to do a professional recording. In terms of quality, they are, but in terms of the sonic result, I don't think it sounds good, because all I'm hearing is the sound of this room. Now, granted, they have put some acoustic treatment in there, and that'll cut down some of the reflections and some of the echo, but essentially, you're hearing this room. So these microphones, and they're pointing straight down to the floor, which for me, I would angle these differently, and I'd probably lower them as well. I mean, you could actually create some kind of deca tree array here as well if you wanted to, but the problem you've got is this room is always going to sound like this room. So this is the thing with microphone placement. It doesn't matter how expensive the microphone is that you've got, or the microphones. It doesn't matter where you place them to some extent. If the room has got a sound of its own, then you're going to be struggling with the sound of that room. So in this room, for instance, if I was asked to do a recording and try and get a sort of a high-end professional recording for, say, an album, I think what I would do, I would spot mic everybody as closely as I could, and then I'm basically eliminating the room. So the closer you put the microphone to the source, the less of the room you get and the more of the source you get. So you have to do that balance, and there's no set rules. It's like you'd have to experiment and use judgment and experience to know how close to put the microphone to the instrument. So I would probably spot mic everybody that I could, and then I would process that all separately to sort of bring it all together. And then I would add in, because I would have taken out the sound of the room by getting closer, I would then add in some artificial reverb to make it sound like it's in a hall. But I wouldn't use these up there. I mean, perhaps, I've never been in this room, but perhaps down in this position it sounds a little bit nicer from the conductor's perspective, and really that's where I would put these microphones if I was doing a recording. Now, for convenience, I'm guessing that these are probably just set up to capture rehearsals and to listen back to rehearsal recordings so they can make notes on what they need to improve. But sonically, I don't think that's a good recording out of this room with those microphones where they are. Like I say, just my opinion. So don't shout at me, please, Black Dyke band. It's just my opinion. So what I'm saying is, it's all about context. So even, if you've got the cheapest microphones in the world and you put them in the right place, well, perhaps not the cheapest microphones in the world, but let's say you've got some really low-end microphones. I mean, for instance, the other example here, let's go back to the message just to check I've covered everything. So we're talking about Zoom H6. Now, the Zoom H6, I've just Googled it, comes up £205 there. So, with the best will in the world, that's not an expensive microphone, and it's even a recorder as well. So, and you can get cheaper ones. You could go for, like, the Zoom H4 is a pretty good one, £139. So, we're talking about the Zoom H6 here. Now, I'll play you a clip of the video that has used a Zoom H6. I'll just forward it to a louder bit. Okay, seems a shame to stop that. It's nice. So here we have a beautiful room and a beautiful sounding room, and you can see it's got acoustic treatment around it. But regardless of acoustic treatment, some rooms sound great anyway and other rooms don't. That's always the way it is. Now here, this is a Zoom H6. Now the person that emailed me has confirmed this because he spoke to the person doing the video and the audio recording, and essentially they had a Zoom H6 on a stand, I think probably about ear height. And so what you're hearing here is what the person doing the recording was hearing in the room, because their Zoom H6 would have been near them. And essentially, the microphone it's like you've got two of them. You'd have to have two. So you either had two microphones in the setup or a stereo recorder like the Zoom H6. And essentially, they are basically your ears. So, you think about this. If you're stood there in this position, looking at this performance, your ears are sort of receiving the sound where you were stood. Now, if you were to go and stand where the conductor is, it'd sound different again. If you were to stand next to the sit next to the tuba players, again, it's different. If you'd go right back into the corner of the room, it'd all sound different. So it's about context. So basically, if you think about where you would stand to get the best sound, that's where you put the microphone. And if you can't get that exactly where you want it, you have to sort of compromise sometimes. But the more compromises you make, the worse the sound's going to be. I'm guessing that this video person was sort of somewhere in the audience towards the back. But if somebody said to you, can you record it from the front of the stage, you would get the conductor's perspective. Now, that might not necessarily be a bad thing, but it depends on the room. So if the room sounds terrible where the conductor stood and you're recording there, it's going to sound terrible regardless of what microphone you're using, or microphones I should say, because when I say microphone, we're always talking stereo here. You never record mono these days, so you'd want a stereo recording always. So I think that is the crux of the matter. The room is very important. Now, what do you do if the room doesn't sound good? Well, it goes back to a little bit what I said before about the Black Dykes Bandroom. You have to do it differently. The easiest recording to make is a stereo recording because it's just two channels of audio. From my ears, there's some post-processing gone on this, and that makes a good bit of difference as well. But if the room doesn't sound good, you're then going to have to sort of break it out into individual sections. So, for instance, with my system here, I've got the Zoom H8 there, and I've expanded it. So I've got basically 10 inputs that I can record at once, and I've also got this additional recorder here. I've got a couple of other recorders as well now, but never mind. And I've got a good selection of microphones, and so I would sort of spot record different sections closely, and then bring it together, and like I said before, put the reverb on it. And the stereo pair, I would still use a stereo pair at some point in the room, but I probably wouldn't use much of that mix. I'd probably knock the stereo pair down in the mix and just use all the separate mics in a bad sounding room. But then the opposite way around, if the room sounds good or reasonable, or somebody hasn't got a budget to pay for somebody to come and set all these microphones up, then you'd go with just a single stereo recorder. And that's relates to this question, because this is about people doing it themselves as well, and that people are more likely to want to just get hold of a stereo recorder and do it themselves. They're not going to want to buy all this kit and set it up and have the experience to even set it all up. But a stereo recorder is an easier way of doing it, but you need a decent sounding room. I'll give you an example of a recording I did in this room. This is the John Alcott Club, and I recorded the Flixton community band here, and I used a stereo pair here, and I don't use the microphones on, well, there isn't any microphones on this Zoom, but I don't use the microphones that come with the Zoom recorders. I have got a Zoom H4, and I could use that, and that'd be simpler still. But I think separate microphones sometimes sound better, and so I recorded the recording I'm going to play you in a minute with these microphones here. Let me just pause the video and find those. So I recorded it with these Sub-Zero mics, a matched pair of ribbon mics that were 180 quid basically. The reason I did that is I wanted to use a ribbon mic, because I've done various recordings with all of these microphones in different places. Using these two Rode NT1s, you get a very bright, clean sound, And the same with these. Well, these are a bit too bright. These AK 1000Ss, but I wanted to get a ribbon. The ribbon mic have got like a warm sound to them, and I wanted to use those for this stereo recording. Ideally, I would have used this fathead microphone, but yeah, I mean the fathead microphone. There's not a great demand for people paying for recordings these days, and the fathead. Is it a fathead? It is. Yeah, so a used pair of fathead microphones, £635. So the outlay to get these things, nearly more than that. I just can't see them anywhere. But yeah, the outlay to get these things has got to be considered as well. So going back to what I used these Sub-Zero microphones, and this is the resulting sound. Obviously there was quite a bit of post-processing, but here you go. There's a little clip of it. So there you go. I'll put links to all of these in the description, these videos I've played, so you can go and have a listen yourself. But essentially, that was done with a cheap stereo recorder with two cheap microphones plugged in, and I placed these I'll find the microphone, an example of the microphone placement, but I was probably in the middle of the room, really, maybe a bit towards the back. Basically, my family were there as well, and I was playing in the band, so I recorded it by putting a tripod up here with the recorder and the microphones at about ear height if you were stood up. So yeah, I just did them in an XY configuration, similar to this sort of thing here because of the shape of them, but standard XY tends to be more like that, or even like that. So yes, that's how I used it. So let me just go back to the email now and check I've answered everything. So that we discussed the Black Dyke Bandroom, discussed Zoom H6. Yeah, I've covered that, I think. You know, it's not an exact science. It is, you know, you hear the sound of the room. If you've got a stereo microphone or a stereo recorder in that room where you're stood, it's going to sound pretty much how it sounds to you where you're stood. If the room sounds bad, the recording is going to sound bad. If you want to get around that, you're going to have to have a lot more microphones, put them all closer to the sections or the individual instruments, and do a whole lot of mixing and post-processing. If you don't want to do that and you don't like the sound of the room, you need to find a different venue with different acoustics. You know, it's even places like school halls can have decent acoustics, weirdly. You just got to find the right place, really. Yeah, so I've talked about combining them. You can do that. Anytime you do actually use spot microphones, you do always have a stereo recording anyway, because you will use maybe a bit of that or all of it if the room sounds pretty good. You know, there have been occasions where the spot mics just don't get used in the end, or I'll put that low in the mix because the main stereo version of it was so good. You needn't have had the spot mics. Yeah, so I hope that was useful, and if anyone's got any more questions, I'll try and answer it. And like I say, just to reiterate, these are my opinions based on my experience. So if anyone's got any different experiences, then please, put a comment below or do a video and tell us all how you do it. That'd be great. All right, thanks for watching.